Welcome back to Mom in Mind. I'm your host, Dr. Kat. On this episode, I'm talking with Bianca Sprague, and we are diving deep into rage, why it happens, how it happens, what contributes to it, and what you can do about it. I really appreciate the perspective that she brings in and just the discussion overall. We've talked about rage and postpartum rage many, many times on this podcast. So she's talking about rage today from a slightly different angle than other conversations we've had, but also, there are resonances to other things we've talked about on this podcast in terms of rage. But the point I really want to drive home is just how many things contribute to why we feel rage, and that is what she touches on a lot in this episode. I'm really happy to bring this conversation to you. She is the founder of Bebo Mia and has been a dedicated author, educator, activist, and doula since 2007. And she's really passionate about accessible pre and postnatal care for marginalized communities and advocates for mental wellness in families, drawing from her own struggle with postpartum depression and her own family life experiences. She champions reproductive health and justice, really focusing on breaking down barriers for female and queer entrepreneurs and restoring joy, equity, and safety in family care through her expertise and innovative approaches. So let's dive in and hear from Bianca. Welcome, Bianca. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I love talking about rage, which sounds like a weird thing to say, but and a weird
It's
thing
not, me too.
strange to say it, but it's so pervasive and it happens so often, and it's also one of those things that's just so upsetting for folks that are dealing with it, and um in so many ways. So yeah, I'd love for you to just kind of let us know how you got into a little bit about what you do, but like how you got into really wanting to focus on rage.
Oh, I would say actually rage was my origin story of everything that I've done for the last 20 years. At this point, I've created a doula school. I've served thousands of clients as a birth doula, as well as, reproductive health journey,
Mhm.
both ends of it. And I've started a pregnancy and parenting movement that's in 49 countries. And when I think about that, and I can say rage was the fuel for all of that. Because when I was 26 when I had my daughter, it was probably a decade earlier than I intended to have a baby. I was under-resourced. I was in domestic violence. I
Mhm.
had no familial support. I just moved 4,000 miles away, so I didn't really know anyone. Like it was not ideal.
Yeah.
And I had an undiagnosed postpartum mood disorder for
Right.
about the first 2 years. Like it was real dark. It was
Yeah.
dark
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
And I knew I had gone through a transformation after my birth. Like I came home and I remember pacing my kitchen, holding my daughter, like something just happened to me. And
Mm.
I'm a different person, like at a cellular level.
Right.
And I hadn't started as a doula yet, so I didn't know as much as I do now. But,
Hmm.
and I remember just like, it was spraying this anger out. It was just like anybody
Yeah.
that came
Yeah.
near me got this like wrath of this anger.
Hmm.
And I actually had this urgency because I wanted to get my daughter and I out of that home and into our own safe housing and all of those things. And I found that this fuel was my anger. And but I know it was so profoundly uncomfortable. It was like my skin hurt from it. Like it would just like swirls in your chest and in your throat and in your stomach. Like it's a really visceral, it's a big emotion.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I started doing my birth doula work, which is actually the work I used. I immediately did my doula training. I started serving clients. My practice grew very quickly and I got, spoiler alert, into safe housing. And my daughter and I are just excellent.
Good.
To almost 20 years later. So, but I started seeing other families and I would go back for my postpartum checkups and this feeling of, they might say like anger, they're so frustrated all the time. And so much of it was rooted in their relationships at home. Like
Right.
this lack of equity at home. And we can read all the books we want about like the cute ways to try to create equity. But
Mm.
like the point is, there's very few people have it. And that weight of emotional labor, sometimes doing paid labor, for sure doing a mountain of unpaid labor,
Yeah.
while having like us not being listened to, like all these things. It's a bit of a mess. And so I started seeing all these folks who had just had their babies talk about this feeling that they're like, it feels like I'm so tired, but I have like this heat, this feeling.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, there might be a thing here, because I thought it was just me.
Right. Right.
And it wasn't until I started my doula school where now I had parents who were coming to, learn a skill and start a business, that the anger, well, first I started feeling so angry because they were just trying to negotiate for their time, and they'd be like, well, I really want to do it, but like I'm not allowed. I really want to do it, but I don't have hands-free time. I just don't know when it's going to fit in my family schedule, like all of these kind of
Mm.
things. And once I started just giving permission for people to start naming these feelings, not that I have to give permission, but the
Sure.
encouragement
Sure.
to,
Sure. Yeah.
um, this rage was profound. Like I kind of like pulled the
Hmm.
can of worms, just opened it right up. And so it became something that is just this common thread within my work and within the work at Babel Mia, that we talk about. We talk about rage, and we talk about how we can use it productively. And I mean, we first have to learn about rage because we've been socialized to just don't look
Smile.
at it.
Smile. Pretend everything's okay. Yeah.
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 Yeah. That's makes a lot of sense. I am so. I mean, you're getting in the perspective you were just describing. In the doula school, you're both talking about it from like lived experience. The people you're talking to have their own like lived experience, and then also it's showing up in just trying to move forward with their own passion and being blocked in all of these ways. um and I there's something to be said about how that contributes to rage, not having resources, not having support, and almost like, I don't know, when you were describing the feeling I got was like not being able to move, like almost being
Mm.
stuck or trapped, or and like not
Trapped is a
knowing.
good word.
Is
Yeah.
that some of what you were seeing and are seeing?
Yeah, and I mean, the source of this rage, again, like a significant part of it is the lack of equity at home. Like,
Mhm.
honestly, behind me, I have just these books and there's like 3 rows, and they're all about inequity in at home, all the ways of like the cute ways of making lists and chore charts and sitting together, all the way to like the deep, 70 cents on the dollar, no mat leave, not being listened to, like all of it. It's a mess.
Mhm.
But the same group that I'm talking about has the rage of, if they are parents, which a lot of them are, they've also gone through the experience of the harm that comes within the reproductive health journey. That lack of autonomy. And so in our program, a lot of times people finally hear that, like, they get their rage named,
Right.
because they typically would go home and be like, I don't know why I feel so mad. But later, when they find out, they could have said no to things, they had medical coercion, they, pick a thing like
Right.
birthing in Canada and the US, their doctors tricked them, like all of these these reasons for rage, and now they're being named. And so it's actually, on a side note, one of the things it took me, I don't know why, 8 years to figure this out, but we added free therapy for all of our students and alumni into our
Mm,
program
nice.
because of this exact concept,
Yeah.
that they would discover, that they had been the victim of medical coercion or obstetric violence, and that feeling, being like, now stay in school. It was like,
Right, right.
it was too
Yeah.
much.
And
So
keep
in
potentially working with the people that did the things.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
it's
Go
hard. You
go
have to
right
go like
into the
be in that environment. Oh,
Yeah, so we wanted to make sure that folks got that healing work before they went
mhm,
in and tried to support someone in the
nice.
exact same venue through the exact same processes
Right.
that were the sources of their big T and little T traumas.
Yep.
So, and they continue on, because then once they go out and do care, we also witness, we have the secondary trauma of witnessing other people's issues in the system. So that's one of the things, because it was this rage and
Mhm,
grief that would come up for folks as they learned more about informed consent and evidence-based care and trauma-informed care. There was a lot of feelings to hold in there. But there's so many sources of why we're upset, especially for mothers. Like we're hyper policed,
Mm.
and we do so the bar just keeps moving on either
Yeah.
the split of the work of motherhood or the relationship of motherhood. But
Mm.
we spend most of the time in that workspace, which is dishes, packing lunches, getting costumes, booking
Right.
party venues, remembering the forms, dropping them off, going to dance class, getting on the summer camp wait list.
Mhm.
Like it doesn't stop. And
Mhm.
what makes a quote good mother or good
Mhm.
parent is this ever moving finish line, that just when you think you've got it, you're
Mhm.
not raising
Mhm.
chickens, and so you're not free range mamas, and
No.
so just like
No.
it's all consuming. And so,
Uh,
we have a lot to be mad about. We just don't know how to identify it yet for the most part.
yeah, can you talk more about that? I mean, what are the you touched on like quite a few of the societal things and some things that get in our way of noticing what we're going through, but like what is the experience of rage and why it's hard to notice? Like if somebody's listening to you, how would they notice that they're experiencing rage?
Yeah. So it takes a bit to actually identify the feelings of rage because we've been socialized really from birth to do anything except feel our rage and our anger and I mean, we could use words fury, whatever you
Mm.
can connect
Mhm,
to.
mhm,
There's
mhm,
lots of words to describe it. And so these are emotions that are systematically deprogrammed from us, because when we got mad, we were talked out of it and we were told, that that was rude. And so
mm.
we've lost the idea that our emotions are just neutral. I mean, you've talked about this on your podcast and other times. Like there's a neutrality to our emotions. There's not a good or a bad one, but we see good as like excited, happy, passionate, loving, and bad as anger, grief, rage, fury. Like, and so we're taught to stay in on the quote good side of
Mm,
them.
mhm.
But like we need to feel the full range of emotions and be able to name them,
Yeah.
because that's how we have like a
Mhm.
three-dimensional existence.
Yeah,
And
turns out.
and because it doesn't mean anything about us. Like that's just what's true, because it is happening even if we're talking ourselves out of it. Our
Yeah.
body is holding it. There's a
Mhm.
book, it's very long. It's called When the Body Keeps Score.
Mhm.
It can be a lot for folks. I'm
Yeah.
assuming it's safe to say you've read it or listened to
Uh-huh.
it.
Mhm.
But it's a heavy read. Like
Yep.
you got to be in the right balance state and do it in little bites. But like it shows, our body knows what's happening to us even if we have talked ourselves out of it, and we do it all the time. Like we have
Mhm.
our gut
Mhm.
instincts, and then it can actually be quite infuriating for our body to keep denying our own
Mhm.
truth,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And so if we can start healing that relationship with anger and rage, and I'll tell you guys how to do some of that work, um, it we can see that the feeling that we had, we actually can name we can put a name to the physiological reaction.
Mhm.
It's that we all know what it is at the time when it explodes, and it's usually in an expression that's kind of violent. We've yelled at our kids, we've thrown something, we've snapped at our friend, we've hung up on our mom, like those moments, and where
Mhm.
we're just like all consumed with it,
Yeah.
because that's probably what we can connect to. But that's really like the quote violence of the expression of it, which is
Mhm.
what we've been taught is the expression of anger, which is
Mhm.
a very patriarchal expression of anger, is this
Mhm.
rage and violence. And
Mhm.
so a lot of times we also shy away from it because we think that's the only way we can express it. But we
Right.
can express all of the emotions in like way more creative ways,
Mhm.
um, than
Right.
that one way.
Right. And that big I think from what you're saying that big when it comes out in that big way, that's like the apex of it. But there's been a buildup. There are
Oh, for
things that have
sure.
happened that, like you're saying, we maybe feel something in our body and have ignored it.
Mhm.
We've had a feeling come up that we've pushed aside or talked ourselves out of, and there, who knows what each person's like trajectory is from like when it just kind of starts out to when it gets to that apex point. um but there are signs, and like you're saying, the body is responding to stuff. You can, once you kind of tune in, you can feel it,
Mhm.
and you can notice or begin to notice that it's happening to you.
Yeah, and I think one of the keys is truth telling. And just so everyone knows, this truth telling just has to be with yourself because it's really scary and vulnerable at first.
Hmm.
I say this I say this as a reformed, not truth teller. If you had met me 15 years ago, I would have done literally anything to avoid vulnerability. Like
Uh-huh.
lied, cheated, done
Hmm.
whatever I had to do
Hmm.
to keep this like really stoic, buttoned up, and I realized it was making me really unwell. And that's what happens when
Hmm.
we're not expressing our feelings is they
Hmm.
come out in autoimmune diseases, they come out in mental health crises, they come like this is a way of our body saying we're not well.
Right.
And so it was in response to the death of my dad. I lost him to death by suicide and I realized it was so shocking and I'm so similar to my dad. And
Mm.
I would have never guessed, like when people ask those questions, how do you know any of those, all the things that people want to know because we're fascinated with suicide because it's really
Mm.
hard for our brain to just wrap our head around.
Right.
And in that moment, my heart, it broke and it broke open. And I realized I had work to do.
Hmm.
And I started just saying the truth to myself. And it is a just in that it's simple but not easy.
Yes,
Um,
yeah, totally.
I try to not use the word just because it usually minimizes some major thing. But I started asking like, how do I feel in this moment? What am I feeling in this moment? And it was so scary to say the word shame. And so much
Mm.
of women's anger is rooted. I would find all the things. I feel
Yeah.
irritated that fill in the blank. I don't like that this fill in the blank. These are conversations I was having with myself.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it took a while, but until I got to the words like embarrassed or shame, those ones were the hardest to get over
Yes.
them.
Yeah.
But the correlation of how I felt, like the ability to manage all of my feelings and manage not in a controlled way, but to like really know what was happening, what was matching.
Yeah.
And so an example that was probably relatable as a parent is parent teacher interviews. My daughter she's like an actual genius, which comes with gifts and curse, that she's
Yes.
very, very intelligent in certain buckets.
Yeah.
She's on the spectrum. So there's other areas that are like just maddening. Like she's going
Uh-huh.
off to university next year. And I'm just like, how do you have the skills of a 5-year-old in some of these buckets? Like,
Sure, sure.
and so it was really challenging parenting her. And so when we go to parent teacher interviews and the teacher would, have some things to say about Gray and would be like, whatever, these are the complaints. Gray didn't get these things in. When I asked about them, she said she wrote it down. Then we reminded her and she didn't get it. Are you signing your book at home? Blah, blah, blah. And in those moments, I would look at Gray and I'd be like, Gray, we've talked about this to the teacher. I promise. I go through the thing. And then it wasn't until later that I would be like so mad at Gray, like just like popping off the whole walk home. What are we going to do about this? These are skills you need to have, like yelling at her. And it took me doing these kind of exercises all over the place to realize I was embarrassed because I felt judged as a parent.
Right.
And Gray was being who Gray is. Like she
Hmm.
shines in other areas that we weren't talking about. And like
Uh-huh.
I was picking at the areas that I wasn't going to move her by yelling at her.
Right.
And so I share that example because the next parent teacher interview, which it took me until she was in grade 8 to understand this. So took a while, y'all. That was a lot of parent teacher interviews of me yelling at Gray the whole walk home for the same skills that she still doesn't have because
Hmm.
that's her neurodiverse brain. And so um, I was able, though, to not be mad at Gray because she doesn't deserve my rage. And in that moment, because I'd named it, I could say, what are you doing about this?
Hmm.
Because here's what we're doing at home.
Hmm.
What's your plan, educator, or
Hmm.
whatever the thing is? What's your plan, pediatrician?
Hmm.
Because I've taken it as far as I can. So now what are
Hmm.
you going to do? And
Hmm.
then if they fail, then I get to be mad at them with the appropriate amount of rage because they're not doing their job. Gray's being Gray. She's
Hmm.
doing the best of her freaking
Hmm.
ability and she's a
Hmm.
straight A student and she always has been. And
Hmm.
so these are the skills that I'm like, great. I'm doing this. What are you doing? And in that, I realized I know how to get mad at the right places. I know how
Mhm.
to rage at our politicians. I know how to rage at a doctor who's harming me or my family. I teach my clients how to do it because I don't want to rage on their behalf. But I might after with letter writing. I know how to get mad at parents who are, they did something crappy and the kids are taking the brunt end of it. Like
Mhm.
all of these places.
Mhm.
But it took me being able to identify it and stop doing the thing like yelling at Gray for not having skills that
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
suspect she'll never have.
Mhm.
And so these are the silver linings to it. And this can like really support you in getting to those urgency and like moving through that uncomfortability through the, to find that vulnerability,
Mhm.
to because we're just going to keep that same pattern going. We're going to take
Yeah.
it out on our children. We're going to teach our daughters to not experience rage. We're going to teach them to talk themselves out of their intuition, which is another crux of this issue
Yeah.
that we
Let's
have.
get into that.
Oh my God. Okay. So we're
Uh-huh.
systematically deprogrammed to not trust our intuition. Like
Yep,
it starts with our littles. Somebody
it
goes to
does.
give them a gift, they don't like it, and they're like, I don't want that present. And we're like, yes, you do. No, that's
Yeah.
rude. Like
Mhm.
we do it. I did it. So if anybody feels shame about that, it's okay. We've all done it because we're embarrassed and we
Mhm.
don't, our kid just did something embarrassing. And
Mhm.
instead we could scaffold them to be like, oh, you don't like that? Well, let's set it aside. You might like it later. But regardless, we say thank you when somebody gives us a gift because that's really the skill we want to teach them is
Right.
kindness,
Right.
not to going through their real
Mhm.
feelings or
Mhm.
ideas or thoughts.
Sure.
And so, which I did wrong, but I'm making up for it now with a teenager. So this intuition is so unfamiliar to us. We
Mhm.
go on a date with someone, we didn't like it, but we tell our friends and they're like, I don't know, like they have a good job, they were really funny,
Yeah.
they're really cute. And then you just keep talking yourself into it. And you're
Yeah.
like, yeah, you're right. Oh, you're right. I'm just being crazy. I guess it's just because I was on my period. I guess it would just like we say these
Oh,
things instead of like
like all
we
of this,
just
like
didn't.
the crazy word that's PMS. It's like all of these things that like they ugh, you're totally right. All the socialization and all the things we've been taught to call it instead of like, no, I just didn't like the guy. Or like,
Yeah,
no, it's
yeah,
whatever it is. Like your
whatever it
truth can't
is.
just be your truth. It has to be that there's something like wrong with you, which you
Yeah,
feel shame about, and then you get small and
that's
then
there's that
ugh,
cycle.
yuck. It's so
But we do
gross.
it
Yeah.
because
Oh,
we
yeah.
can usually create a logic. Like it can seem illogical because our
Uh-huh.
feelings aren't logical. They're not
Mhm.
facts, but they're real to us. So
Yeah.
like when you walk into this potential daycare and they're like, we have this food which grown in the backyard and it's close to your work and it's in the price range and they have a spot available and your neighbor goes there so you guys can carpool. But when you walk in and you're like, I don't know, I don't want to send my kid here. You will probably talk yourself out of it because
Mhm.
those selling features are
Mhm.
more important than your intuition. And so
Mhm.
this is the feeling like we don't have to have a reason. That's actually one thing I did do well with Gray as I'm airing all the things I did wrong. But I remember I dropped her off I used to have to send her to last minute daycare because I would go to births. And so I would just she was at home with me. So it'd be like, okay, we got to go. And so I had 3 daycares. 2 were private, like in home. And one of them I dropped her off and when I picked her up, she pulled me down and she's like, I never go there again. And I was
Mm.
like, great. And as we were it seemed lovely. They had like a feed. I could watch what she was doing in the day. And but Gray knew that I trusted her feelings when she didn't have to give me a reason. So
Yeah.
that when we stood up, I said bye. And Gray said, thank you for having me. She was like 3. She said, thank you for having me. That was lovely. And we walked out and I was like, you never have to go back there. And she's like, okay, great. And I never used them again. And
Right.
she didn't have a reason. Like they didn't do anything. She
Right.
just was like, I don't want to be there again. And I was like, perfect. I never want you to be there then if you don't
Mhm.
want to.
Mhm.
And so I've done that part well because and that's a gift because otherwise we don't trust our intuition anymore. And if
Mhm.
you guys could even just fathom, listeners, if you ever have a thing that you just don't want to, you have this feeling you don't want to go to the party, you feel like you should get groceries today and not tomorrow, you don't want your kid going to this camp, like whatever it is, like trust it. And something might not happen,
Right.
but it's because we've now kicked off a different chain of events. Um,
Well, right. I mean, you have to, if you're in the process of not listening to your intuition, you have to start somewhere. And um, maybe it's, you know, quote unquote, smaller things. But even allowing yourself to just, to your point, like make a decision without having to like give a reason or explain yourself, which is another huge
mhm.
problem. Um, it it's like a muscle in a way. You have to practice to be able to listen um and honor that feeling. Um
Yeah.
and you're right, it doesn't to your point, it doesn't always mean that like something bad is going to happen necessarily if you do or don't do that thing. Um but if you're gonna try and feel less rage and less anger and feel less trapped in your life, then listening to yourself is, I mean, I can get into a lot of different like psychological avenues with this. But in some way it it is a little bit of reparenting yourself, whether it's from like
Yeah.
your actual family situation or if it's just a societal thing that you're trying to unlearn.
Oh,
um
that family blueprint and those
oh
child wounds.
man, Man, if everyone were healed from all of this and I never had to work as a therapist again because of that, I'd be so happy. Um,
I'd be happy for you and for all of society as well.
yes, yes, it's
It's
but in it's everywhere though.
yeah.
It's
And
really
and
tough.
those little steps, like, sometimes they might seem like big things that you can easily name.
Mm.
So, for example, if you don't like your marriage right now, I keep bringing it back to relationships, but it's the number one reason why entrepreneurship fails for women and mothers. We always think
Wow.
it's the kids. So like we lose a lot. There's really interesting research that becoming a widow or I think it's like 18 months post divorce are like the peak of women's happiness because they get their life back.
Holy
Um,
whoa.
yeah, because
Whoa, let's just sit with that for a
we're just
second.
buried in rage, the inequity. It's like in your house all the time for those in a hetero context. I'm gay, so I don't get this problem, but I do study it significantly.
Yeah.
But it might be that you don't like your partner anymore, or like you feel like you just chose wrong. Just saying that to yourself, those might be easy to say. For some of you, you might still fight to the death. Like they're a good
Mhm.
dad. These are all the reasons. And if you took a minute and you were like, are they as good as you are a mom? If the answer is no, then they're fine. They're not good. They're
Mhm.
potentially adequate, all the way to like not great in certain buckets. And so, some of the things that actually are the major sources of rage, if you just try it on, just like in your head, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to leave your partner. They might not stay there forever, but the act of telling the truth for you, A, might eliminate some of the rage, and B, it actually creates movement, like space for movement,
Yeah.
because you've spent a significant amount of your time talking yourself back into your partner every single day, or
Mhm.
talking yourself out of your frustration
Mhm.
in your relationship, and what it's like co-parenting with
Mhm.
somebody like that, and that bit of movement, it like it clicks everything into alignment, because you're like, that is why I'm mad. I
Right.
do lay next to them and I hope their feet don't touch me because I'm so mad. And that takes a lot of work.
Uh-huh.
It's probably in your dreams. It's like the first thing
Yeah.
you think of when you go to
Sure.
sleep, and it's after you've packed lunches and you've laid out clothes and you've got yourself like it's never ending. And
Mhm.
so those kinds of like major mad things, I don't like my paid labor, or I like resent stay-at-home moms. Like whatever the thing is, just say it to yourself. This isn't for anybody else. You don't need a witness or an audience for this point.
Mhm.
If you find you need more support, reach out to Dr. Kat and get a therapist.
Mhm.
um,
Well, yeah, I was thinking like when you were walking through that like so much of the therapeutic work is naming these things, like naming emotional states, validating people's experiences, helping them to like not talk themselves out of what their lived experience is and what they know to be true for themselves. And like on the other side of it, like there can become that like internal freedom But part of the reason that it's hard to break free from it is the systematic stuff, the like, well,
Mhm.
I don't have anywhere to go, or this is just what it is right now, or I don't have the financial resources to change anything. And so sometimes people will um, not talk themselves back into it, but it's hard to be truthful with yourself, because that sometimes can mean that action follows.
Action. Exactly. Yeah.
And that is hard, but from my perspective, like, okay, we'll work on that when we get to that part, but
Yeah, we're not there yet.
we're not we're not there yet. Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a quick process. Everybody's process looks different. um but the being able to have that emotional freedom of just even being
Mhm.
able to recognize your own state of being is so powerful.
Yeah, it's profound.
Mm.
And I mean, I know a lot of you are parents, if not everybody, because you love the mom part and the mom in mind. Um, and so, even when you reflect upon your birth, a lot of times we go home with our baby or, go upstairs if you birth at home. And you have these feelings that are like the yes and where you're like, I feel really upset that the plan changed, or I didn't like what this nurse did to me, or I didn't feel listened to. And you still liked other parts of your birth,
Mhm.
and you're happy your baby's here. Maybe also normal if you're not. But when we start to talk about the things that have upset us, we're very quickly pulled, because the rule is we don't do this, by all
Mhm.
women around us, and we're very quickly pulled into the narrative, you have a healthy baby, be grateful, this is bad juju, risky, the evil eye, if you
Right,
start
right, right,
sharing some regret, remorse,
right.
anger about it. And so, when we put this rage context into the experience of motherhood,
Mhm.
we have it so like inextricably linked to something about us not being grateful for our children,
Right.
or not liking the motherhood title and job, which stinks, y'all. The work of motherhood is the worst. It's part of the like industrial prison complex. It's how our society runs, because it's free labor, and we don't actually get to do a lot of the snuggly kiss your head, read to your kids, just listen to them talk without multitasking. Like, we don't get to do that. We get
Right.
to do so little of that. And so, if we can just start talking about, without like anger or our birth story or our lack of support in the postpartum period, and just know that it's not saying you're a bad mom. It
Mhm.
doesn't mean you wished you weren't a mom. It doesn't
Right.
mean like that we're wishing ill on our children. It doesn't mean we're lacking gratitude. Like, it's just what's so, because they've got all, this is what happened in our society, is we got
Mhm.
this like this role of motherhood, which is this deity, like really sacred thing, which if it was that, you'd think they take way better care of us and give us free daycare and
Right.
mat leave and
Mm.
healthcare, all of
Mm.
those things.
All of
But
that, yeah.
we just have the message. And so it's very complicated for us to identify the parts of it that we just like, that stink and that we don't want to put down. Because if you give up the PTA, it can so quickly get tied right back to you're a bad mom, because you don't feel like volunteering at the school. And, then we can go in all these really complicated places. So your kid's going to see you didn't participate. Your parents might have not participated, and you want to show better. It's important to know what's happening in the community. This is how you can stay on top of education. Like, we can take it in lots of values-based directions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because all we have to do is connect it to motherhood, and we'll do anything, and we'll go until we
Yeah.
can't go anymore. And
That is
so
true.
just slowing this down in just some self dialogue. So as you notice in your day, just the like little bite-sized things, you might jump right in the deep end and say you don't like your partner anymore. You don't have to do anything about it. But just naming and knowing that they don't all have to lead to the expression of violence and harm, which is really all that we're taught, because it's how it's like the male version of displays of anger and rage.
Mhm.
And some coping tools to wrap up with would be, cultivating safe angry spaces, so people that will hold your anger and rage and know how to hold it, which might be a therapist, but you can also find really solid groups of friends. You can actually find like really cool like platonic groups online that they're not actually people that you would invite to dinner, but there's
Mhm.
like angry spaces that are really
Mhm.
interesting that have normalized the expression of what makes you rage. And the action piece is really important. So, tell your doctor, like write a letter after if they harmed you, or if you even just feel like you're not sure but you feel unsettled about the experience, write to the governing body and ask, is this a cause for concern? Call the hospital administration, write to your kid's school principal, write to the owner of the daycare. Like all these places that make us feel so much anger that are, systemically oppressing us. They're a really great channel for
Mhm.
change,
Mhm.
to be like rooted in that
Mhm.
anger and
Mhm.
to receive it, because it's really hard to tackle the familial system. It's
Oh,
probably
yeah.
like the hardest one of
Uh,
all of them.
yeah.
So let's take on your like place of worship and your
Mm.
hospital and your
Mhm.
your
Mhm.
mayor and your governor. Like
Right.
they're a little bit easier to tackle, to practice, letting them experience the rage that you're feeling and why. And
Sure.
it's quite profound to kind of start naming, having other people witness and then take
Yeah.
those actions.
Absolutely. And I think to what you were just saying, you're going through kind of like the birthing scenarios where you can have a mix of experience. Some of it was maybe not how you wanted it to go, some of it maybe made you mad, some of it was fine. um I'm thinking of a couple of people in particular when I'm walking through this in my mind. But so there's this part of, yes, it can be empowering to write the letter. Let's say you're writing a letter to the hospital system or to the doctor. Sometimes people will feel like, well, why bother? Nothing's going to change. Nothing's going to happen. And I think just just from your own psychological, emotional perspective, you don't have to write a letter um, for the whole system to change. Like it doesn't like they may never even write back to you. They might not change a single thing about what they do, but what you're describing is acknowledging it for yourself and putting something into action in a way to release some of it, or um, place it where it's supposed to be placed. Eh
Yeah. And I would say there's one more piece of, if you don't say anything, for sure nothing's going to happen. And
Mhm,
then we actually just loop in on ourselves. Like we try to work it out on ourselves. And then the biggest coping tool is we actually blame ourselves.
mhm,
So, whatever the thing is in a hospital system, well, I didn't do my workout and I was supposed to take my prenatal vitamin, and I didn't listen to the first suggestion and I could have gone earlier. Like we end up literally just harming ourselves with trying
mhm.
to make peace with it. And it's really profound. I started writing open letters to my local hospitals for any of my own healthcare. Y'all, they spring into action, and this is in Canada where it's like they care way less about us because it's quote free,
Mhm,
and they still spring into action. If you do this in the US where people are paying for their system, like,
mm.
it's run more like a business versus in Canada, it's like
Yes, yeah.
probably run like your highway systems. That's what our healthcare is like. So they're like, yeah, of course there's potholes here. We'll get to it when we get to it. And so they do take action, and those
Mhm,
things are documented. And if
mhm,
enough people, like I've had my clients where enough people had an obstetrician I'm supposed to disbarred, had his medical license taken away.
mm,
And then it actually opened up this ball of wax that ended up he was committing like multiple crimes, and it was profound. And he was doing like tests on his patients and they didn't know, with these like new induction tools. And it wasn't until some people started saying, now, you're not going to potentially be part of a massive class action suit.
right.
But if we do nothing, for
Mhm,
sure, nothing's going to change. And you will end up looping and just harming yourself.
mhm,
And so I think naming who's harming us, and I sometimes get really like overwhelmed because I've been at this full time for almost 20 years and our medical system's only getting worse. And my wife is a political science professor, so we have we have different ways of how we're both coping with the world and doing
Uh-huh.
activism and, doing these feminist movements. And she always makes me feel like comforts me by explaining there's this beast of the patriarchy, white supremacy, and capitalism. Like it's this like machine that's just like running over us, over our planet, over our families, like commodifying our bodies. Like it's bad. And if we don't add any resistance to it, it's just going to keep bulldozing. So
Mhm.
every time we take an action and we write a letter or we tell somebody or we report or we make a complaint in like a, truly like naming the harm complaint, we're like pushing against this bulldozer, which all I think about is Fern Gully from the 90s in that image. So go wherever you need to, but like the resistance is the only thing that will stop this from running wild and from just making it even worse. And it is helping and we are seeing changes, but like mostly I want all of you listening to not have the terrible backlash of the patriarchy cause you to be doing the self-harm to, try to talk yourself out of these real feelings of anger and rage and harm and big T and little t trauma. Like those things are real and we know why they happen to us and it's not your fault. And
Mhm.
this is how we can start unpacking that part of it, which will make us, it's anger's okay. Anger is healthy. Anger is helpful. Anger is
Mhm.
powerful. And
Mhm.
like together as a group of aware, angry girls and women, man, we're unstoppable.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, I know that you've created a special link for the Mom and Mind listeners, to look into their to some of your resources around rage a little bit more. So can you talk about that for a quick minute?
Yeah, so I found that birth work was a really great outlet for me. It was profound, and I've supported thousands of other folks use, have this outlet for what can we do with all this rage. The action part being supporting birth work. And so we put together a package for y'all. It's at our website. So bebomia.com. That's BEBOMIA.com /mum and mind, all spelled out. And you can find there's a quiz because who doesn't love a quiz? We have a free workshop there. There's a link to check out our doula training, but it will like kick you into the world that is Babel Mia. And we do book clubs where we talk about rage. We have a whole podcast which talks about rage. There's lots of free and paid ways to hang out in our community. And we love truth telling. So you can come test it out there because finding a community that's okay to say those things it can be really hard to find. So if you want to see if Babel Mia is the right fit for you, you can hang out. You can hang out with us.
Nice.
On Wednesdays we wear pink.
Nice. That's great. Well, I really appreciate this conversation and all the context I think that you're providing to people to really introspect and look inward and be in touch with their intuition and um, put their anger where it's supposed to go instead of being turned inwards. It's super empowering and I'm really grateful for this chat.
Thanks for having me back again.
Yeah, happy to have you. Please get connected with babomia.com. You can also go to Instagram and Facebook to Babomia Inc. or Pinterest and YouTube at Babomia. And as she mentioned, there is a link just for Mom and Mind listeners at babomia.com /mom and mind, where you can go and check out what they offer and also see if those resources are a good fit for you. You can also go to wellmindperinatal.com and check out the resources I offer, the online courses that are on demand. You can listen to them, watch them in chunks or in whole. And there's a lot of different stuff that I offer to help people understand why they might be feeling the way that they feel in the postpartum period. So if that is something that you are needing, go and check those out. Or just share Mom and Mind as a resource to anybody that you know who needs to know that they are not alone in this perinatal mental health journey. Thank you so much for being here. Until next time.